Seems everything's live.
Okay, perfect. I'll see you at quarter two. Good evening, everyone, and welcome from a cold Johannesburg. It's that time of year where we say it's never been this cold in Johannesburg before, and we all look at immigrating. But it's nice to be back with you, albeit slightly earlier than usual. We're doing 6 p.m. this evening instead of usually 8 p.m. And we're joined from Cape Town by Josh Shevitz, Josh, you need to focus on us and to say good evening to everyone who's watching us this evening.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I
Fantastic.
look forward to hearing Amit speak.
And Dave, you joining us from Cape Town as well. Let's get you a little closer to your camera.
Hi, Howard. How are you?
Good, and yourself?
All good, thanks.
So Dave, we have to always start by saying, explain that accent to us.
Well, I am originally from the United States. I've been in Cape Town for just over 13 years, which means I'm about 10 years away from being considered a Cape Townian.
I think maybe 20 years away from
Maybe
being
20,
considered.
maybe 20.
But much of what we're going to be talking about tonight is about America. And so tell us where in the United States you actually come from, and then we're going to pepper you with a few questions about the current American administration.
Okay. I'm originally from a small town called Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which is right outside Philadelphia. And yeah, grew up there until finished high school, and then I actually moved to Israel. I lived in Israel for about 8 years, and then moved to Cape Town. So haven't been there for quite a while, but I'll do what I can to represent the American government here for us.
And Josh, you've also jumped around the world a little bit.
Yes, I grew up in Johannesburg, which is where I know you from. I moved to Israel in 2012, spent the past 14 years there, and moved back to South Africa 6 months ago, 5 months ago.
So, Dave, when we look at it, a lot of South African members of our community were huge Trump fans. And do you think things have changed in the last few weeks?
I don't know. It's an interesting one. I actually haven't thought about it. I know, they probably think about Trump in some ways, probably correlated very much with the way Israelis think about Trump. So I'm sure Amit will probably have an opinion about that. But what I could probably say about the Israelis is that, they're probably a bit unhappy with the way things are going. And I would imagine that many of the, certainly South African Jews would see the lens of Trump through what they feel about Israel. So I'm sure what he's doing now and whether they for this MOU or against it is probably coloring their feeling about him very much at the moment.
And you come from New Jersey, just round the corner from New York. There's, of
Yep.
course, a mayor of New York who this week lashed out against AIPAC. Have you
Yeah.
got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think he is supporting, he is becoming one of the largest voices in, call it the new Democratic Party. I think this is all about positioning for the midterm elections that are coming up. He's supporting and has given his endorsement to a number of uh, progressive candidates, members of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I think this is all part of that playbook. You can't lose for his voter base by calling AIPAC monsters, unfortunately.
And how do you think that plays with the rest of the Democratic Party and with Democratic supporters?
Sure, I don't know. I'd love to think that when you kind of get out of the Twitter, social media kind of phase of where we get a lot of our information from, I think most people are probably a lot more moderate than we think, but you never hear about them. So I don't know. You'll really see it in the elections coming up. I mean, New York specifically has become a much more progressive place. Does he represent all Democrats? I don't think so. I think it's going to be very regionalized. And I think I was even listening to, where there are more moderate Democrat bases, the people who are running for those seats are more moderate Democrats. New York, specifically New York City, it's turning into quite a progressive place, all the, high concentration urban areas. So it plays very well for him.
So, Josh, you've been living in Israel until a few months ago. Elections are coming up in Israel. They're scheduled probably for October this year. How do you think the Israeli population has moved since the last elections? We went through a slew. This is one of the longest serving governments that they've had in Israel for many years. But how do you think the electorate has actually moved since the last elections?
I think a lot of people are very set in their ways, regardless of what politicians do or don't do. So I think the variation is going to be smaller than what people think. You're probably talking about 10 seats, which isn't a lot of people. That's maybe, I don't know, 800,000 people or something like that that'll move between camps. There's also a lot of
very big
pride
shift
on stake. Yeah, in Israel it is. 10 seats can get you either the 65 that you need or the 55 in which you lose. And that's what we've seen from repeated elections over the past few years, is that's the sort of shift that there is. Whether people have moved more left or more right, I think a lot of people have moved more right in a lot of ways in which they think, but there's probably a greater portion of people who are upset with how Bibi has handled the past few years.
So, so while we're on elections, can we talk about South African elections? Because we're heading to the polls on the 4th of November. Within Cape Town, you're both Cape Town based. Did you see a large chunk of people going out to register to vote this past weekend? Dave, maybe start with you. I presume June the 30th is coming up. Are we going to chase you out of the country first of all on the 30th of June?
Do you know they did announce there was apparently the announcement of a protest, a xenophobic or anti-foreigner protest in Sea Point last week, and to my understanding there were more policemen than protesters there. So I was a bit nervous if they were going to target someone like me as well. But I don't think in the Western Cape we seem to be a bit more shielded than what's going on in KZN or in Gauteng for sure. It doesn't seem. I actually don't know if anyone is talking about it. Certainly from a business point of view, anything that it's any kind of thing here.
So I saw the videos of the Cape Town protests, and it looked like there were 10 or 15 people only, but that's of course in big contrast to what we've seen in KwaZulu-Natal and certainly what we've seen in Gauteng. And I can say a lot of people in Gauteng are particularly worried. And no matter which coffee shop you go into or which restaurant, you find that many of them are staffed by particularly Zimbabweans in this region. And people are actually nervous. They're very worried. And I'm going to ask the people who are busy watching us this evening, you have the ability to chat and comment. So if I can ask you, please, to use the chat button that you'll see. Please let us know in the where you're watching us from, number one. And number two, are people in your area actually worried about what we're going to be seeing in the next few weeks coming up near you? Josh, you've seen Lee, by the way, is telling us she's watching from Israel. Josh, have you seen anything in Cape Town that would make one worried?
I have seen nothing, absolutely nothing. And I don't think that's very much surprising. Cape Town has always been quite separated from the rest of the country and how things pan out.
Howard, we're in Cape Town. We're on permanent vacation. There's no problems here.
Well, I'm just seeing how many people are watching us. Lorraine tells us she's watching from Vancouver in Canada, and Marianne is telling us she's watching us from Cape Town, and Lee's watching us from Israel. So we certainly have a broad spectrum of people, and Johnny Joseph's watching us from Los Angeles, and he's off to the South African consulate as soon as it ends. But Johnny, tell us what you're doing at the South African consulate. I seem to remember that the Americans booted out our last consul general based in Los Angeles, and Maureen is from Minnesota or Minnetonka in Minnesota.
Minnetonka. Great pair of
Minnetonka.
moccasins. It's an amazing pair of shoes you get from there, right? She'll know what I'm talking about.
I'm clueless.
Yeah, but as long as you've got some shoes, Josh.
Yes.
So guys, tell us, you managed to get us Amit Segal for this evening. What was the content? Why did we select him? Why are we talking to him this evening?
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think in one of our local Zionist Federation meetings, we just discussed, obviously there's an election that was at the time, there wasn't a date yet, but they said they were coming to it. And with everything that's happened over the last couple of years and all of the kind of chatter, it was really just a need that we thought that the community would want to know a bit more and understand, kind of cut through. Everyone listens to their own podcasts and all this, but some people don't. And really, we really thought that there would be a need to get some real kind of first degree information from someone who's really on the inside, if you will, which Amit certainly is.
So
And
many people. Sorry,
it should
Josh.
also be said that we're not going to end here. Um, we're going to give from, hopefully, the plan is from different perspectives so that people are educated about what are the things in play in the elections, what are the issues that are most prominent, and what are the potential outcomes of different circumstances happening, because everything affects us very personally, and so it's important to know.
Just by the way, Anki is watching us from London. Anki, hello. It's been a long time. It's nice to see you online. And Claudette is in Somerset West. And Jill is in Hertfordshire in the UK and not so happy with politics in the UK. So I'm going to actually ask our two people on the screen to comment on the resignation yesterday of Keir Starmer. And just before we do that, Ellie and Leora are watching us from Cape Town. Julie is in the Greater Kruger Park. And Julie, would love to know, what have you seen recently in the Greater Kruger Park area? And what's the weather like at this time of year? And is it dry or is it wet? We've had quite a wet season. So, David, what do you think of Starmer's resignation, and what do you think is next in the UK?
I'm not sure. I really don't know what's going to happen, but it's just kind of shows another kind of nail in the coffin of British politics, to be very honest.
And Amit Segal has joined us this evening. Amit, we are already pre-chatting live, and within 3 minutes we'll begin formally. But it's nice to see that you've dressed up for us this evening.
It's actually for the 8 p.m. broadcast, but you should take it as a compliment.
No Israeli has ever worn a suit and a tie for us. Even the president never dressed up the way you did. My family in Israel tell me that they're massive fans, and they watch you every night on television. Not everyone is a fan, and we'll deal with that in a moment. But if you don't manage to piss some people off, then it means you stand for nothing.
Exactly. Hated by all the right people.
I was watching yesterday your interview with Mario Norfel, which I thought was very interesting. Did you find him open? Because over the last while, Mario has been particularly a bit of a propagandist ever since the conflict with Lebanon broke out. How did you find your interview with him?
So actually, I had expected to meet a younger version of Tucker Carlson, but it ended up very friendly. He asked good questions, and he was quite curious, which is quite important for interviewers. I didn't recognize any of these fears.
So the one thing that actually struck me was the fact that you seem to agree on a lot of things except for the facts. And he actually commented on that to say, if his facts are correct, then he's right. If your facts are correct, he's wrong. But there seems to be a disagreement on what the truth and the actual facts are. Do you find that a lot in the work that you're actually doing, that we have much less news and much more opinion today, and no one's really quite sure what the facts are?
So here is a broader issue. I marked last week 20 years for my job for working for today's channel 12, in the past channel 2, Israel's biggest news outlet and most popular TV station. And while I'll still walk every day to the same office in the same studio with the same people, give or take, at the same hour, the job has dramatically changed. In 2006, we were busy first and foremost with bringing the news. And today in 2026, the news is, I mean, are taken for granted. It's what what's your opinion about the news? What is the next step? What's your analysis? So the market of facts is wide open for various news outlets. I don't think that today there are less facts in the field. I just think that today's media, the role of media today is different than it was. I'll give you an example. Why do people still bother to watch news at 8 p.m.? 20 years ago, my mother used to watch the news broadcast every day because otherwise she wouldn't had known what the temperatures are going to be the day after, whether to wear a coat or to take an umbrella. Nowadays, no one needs the 8 p.m. broadcast to understand what the forecast is. And the same applies for news about the political crisis or the war with Iran or the withdrawal from Lebanon, etc., etc. So then rises the question again, what does the news stand for? And you see a process in which you have right-leaning news outlets and center left-leaning news outlets, secular ones and religious ones. So I think people watch news worldwide in order to get more arguments for the debate the day after.
Or maybe
That's the main thing.
to reaffirm their own positions.
To be honest, it's give or take the same. Now, I have a unique point of view because I think I'm going to be the last journalist on earth who's going to work or to actually appear on a television station that most of its members do not share his same political opinions. I mean, I know it's like the extincted animals. It's like penguins in the United Kingdom. You have two. So we have give or take one here. Why does it matter? Because I mean, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, we were under the impression that we can have different views, but we work on behalf of Lady Truth. While I still think I work for Lady Truth, I see that it's harder and harder to actually be on the same, in the trenches with people who are, I mean, 180 degrees opposite from my opinion. And I guess it goes both ways.
Well, to everyone who's watching us this evening, the time has just gone 6 p.m. in South Africa, 7 p.m. in Israel, and a big welcome to everyone watching us this evening across the channels that we're broadcasting on, 2 channels on Facebook, on YouTube, as well as Zoom. So a big welcome to everyone on behalf of the South African Jewish Report. And it is such a pleasure to partner this evening with the South African Zionist Federation, both in Cape Town, KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the national body as well. And thank you so much for organizing Amit for us this evening so we can get a broader perspective of what's happening in Israel, what's happening in the Middle East. And as Israel heads towards its elections in October this year, we want to try to place all of the building blocks in place in order to make sure that you have a fuller understanding of what those elections look like and the big issues that are facing the Israeli electorate. So on behalf of the South African Jewish Report, a big welcome to everyone, and nice, Dave, to partner with you. Please, nice to have you on board, and give us an introduction.
No, I mean, thanks, Howard. I mean, I wanted to welcome everyone as well. My name is David Cohen. I'm the chair of the South African Zionist Federation Cape Council. Again, great to collaborate with our friends in Joburg and in KwaZulu-Natal, the National South African Zionist Federation and KwaZulu-Natal Zionist Council, and of course, the South African Jewish Report. With those of us living outside Israel, we can't vote. But as Jews and Zionists, we're keenly interested and sensitive to the outcome of the Israeli election. Every election is presented as the most critical election in Israeli history. And while we might only know this after the fact, there is so much information out there. It's difficult to cut through the noise. You have Bennett, Ben-Gvir, Bibi, Gadi, so many names, not to mention Yair, Mansour, Einat, and a host of others. So, it is a privilege of bringing you, at least digitally for now, one of Israel's premier political analysts, Amit Segal. I'll just quickly say Amit, who is married to Duffy Kremer, our former Jewish agency representative's husband's cousin. Got that, everybody? It just shows you the strength of the Jewish people and how actually close we are. So time is tight. We know that Amit has to make it to the news. So hand it back over to you, Howie.
Thanks so much, Dave. And so, Amit, we have so many questions for you. And so I'm going to ask you if we can keep the answers as short as possible, because we want to do this tour of the Middle East with you this evening. And I know to ask any journalist to do that is close to impossible. But Amit, one of the things that I never anticipated was when our adverts for tonight went out, I had a slew of people from Israel contacting me to say, do you understand how right-wing he is? And my response is, well, first of all, we talk to everyone because that's the way we learn. Second of all, we believe that he will have unique insight into both the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office, and the right wing of Israeli politics. Important that everyone understands. But maybe just before we begin, put into context for us, where do you stand politically, and do you think that influences the analysis that you're going to be giving us this evening?
Okay, so first of all, I'll just introduce myself. I work for Channel 12. I write a weekly column for JRLive196, Israel's biggest newspaper, and I have an English newsletter whose address appears now on the chat. It's called It's Noon in Israel. The idea is that it's published every day. It publishes every day at 7 a.m. Eastern time, but since you live in South Africa, so you'll get it afternoon in South Africa, but it's in English. It's free, of course. And after this shameless ad, I'll try to answer to your question. Do my opinions affect my coverage? Of course. And any journalist who might tell you that it's not the case should be sent either to a mental institution or to a polygraph. Because truth is that our opinions, the place where we grew up, our beliefs, our emotions, our gender, our location, they all affect our coverage. The most important fact is to know this, which means that being objective, while being objective is almost impossible, being fair definitely is. And I think the paramount test for any journalist is as follows. Will you publish an information that might hurt the chances of the ideological camp that you support to get reelected? Can you publish anything against the people that you ideologically support? Can you publish anything that can change the track of the nation to the opposite one from the one you think is good for the country? If the answer is yes, yes, and yes, respectively, you're a good journalist. I'll give you an example about myself. 2.5 months ago in this very room, I had a tense phone call with the Prime Minister Netanyahu. He just found out that I'm going to publish an investigative report about his chief of staff, the then chief of staff, Ziv Agmon, who had terrible racist words against Sephardic Jews, against the Likud voters, Likud Knesset members, and against the Prime Minister himself, who he blamed for being accountable for the October 7th massacre. And he yelled at me and he hanged up the phone with what we call epic fury these days, or roaring lion. And I published it nonetheless. To be honest, I think that while your question is fully legitimate, I think that the fact it is asked only about right-wing journalists reflects something really troubling, that there are too many people in Israel who still believe that media and left are equal, and that there are only two options to be journalists in Israel or in the US or South Africa as well, being a professional journalist and a right-wing journalist. Now, I ask anyone from the other political affiliation to ask themselves, can they name one example in the last decade for bringing information that damaged their political ideology, their political leaders. I'm still waiting for an answer.
So, Amit, you're talking to a South African audience at the moment, and South Africa is sometimes persona non grata in Israel, given what our government has done, particularly at the International Court of Justice. What do you think the perspective of South Africa currently is within Israel?
The image is not at its peak, to say the least. The relationship between Israel and South Africa is a tragedy because Israel turned to the former South African administration or regime because when it was isolated, especially in Africa. Hence, when when the Black community got its voting rights and ended the apartheid regime, it almost automatically identified with the Palestinians. And the outcome is that situation only deteriorated between the two countries. Unfortunately, I don't have anything optimistic to say about this. But who
Okay,
knows?
well, let's hope we have some optimistic things to talk about. Maybe the elections, which are now scheduled for October in Israel. South Africa's elections, local municipal elections in November this year. But it's been a very tumultuous week in politics. And the real question is, has Israel been betrayed by Donald Trump, by Vice President Vance, and by the American administration? What's your perspective on the week that's been?
Well, while I would never have signed such an agreement, and while I'm highly pessimistic about the prospects of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon through this agreement or these negotiations, I do not think that betrayal and stabbing in the back and all this very emotional rhetoric actually help to describe the process. When allies go into a mutual war, usually it emanates from different perspectives, especially when one ally is a national or an international unprecedented superpower, and the other one is, in the best case scenario, a regional power. One got 330 million strong population and the other 10 million. Israel went on this war in order to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, from having a ballistic missile industry, and hoping to topple the regime. While the United States went on war in order to try and prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, thus avoiding a replay of the North Korea crisis in the 90s, and in order to recover its standing as a formidable power in the world. Now, Israelis are not obsessed with energy prices, but the United States is. And this is only one example. Israel is obsessed with Lebanon, and the United States doesn't care about it. It's just, it's just a marginal phenomenon in their eyes. President Trump doesn't even know that there are no sands in Lebanon. He said that what happens if one drone hits the sand in Lebanon? There isn't a grain of sand in the entire state of Lebanon. But so what I'm trying to say that we should be very thankful for the Americans for all the efforts that they have made. Try not to piss off President Trump, and to keep the good rapport between the two nations, to bury any hatchet before it gets to the press, and to hope that it's going to change again, because what they are going to is a zip file of the last decade or the last generation of Israel and its fundamentalist neighbors. Now they learn rapidly. They're learning rapidly what does it mean to negotiate with terrorists, to negotiate with fundamentalist Muslims. That a word is not a word, and let's call a spade a spade. It's going to lead to nowhere.
Do we think that the comments by J.D. Vance, which really almost implied that Israel should be both grateful and obedient, How do you think that's been received in Israel?
The reception was very bad, to say the least. I think Vance tried to actually talk to an American audience. Now, the main opposition to this agreement was posed by Israel and the Israeli support wing of the Republican Party. That's why Vance actually directed his armor, his rhetoric weapon towards Israel. I think it was a very problematic move from a political perspective, from the eyes of J.D. Vance himself. I don't think it's a good political strategy or even tactics to try and attack Israel. But we'll know quite soon.
You said that if you had your way, this wouldn't have been the agreement to end the war. Do you think it's been an American surrender or capitulation to Iran?
If it ends up like this, absolutely. Here's the thing. What we're seeing now is not a nuclear deal and not a historical deal. It's merely a deal to mutually open the Strait of Hormuz, fueled or fortified with some financial elements, and I'll explain. The financial elements are very worrying if they actually lead to an Iranian recover from the grave economic crisis that led to the protests, which led in turn, in a ripple effect, to the war, because helping on its way, etc. Now, since the protests at the beginning of 2026, Iran's assets were degraded by something between $300 billion and $500 billion by the Israeli and American attacks. According to the deal, and it's not lifting the sanctions, it's only waiving the sanctions temporarily, it necessarily means that the highest amount of cash that is going to flood the coasts of Iran is something like $25–30 billion, which is a drop in the sea. It's like trying to actually throw water glasses into an empty pool. So in 6 months' time, if Americans keep insisting on the nuclear principle and under the assumption, my assumption, that the maximum Iranians are willing to give doesn't mean the minimum Trump is willing to take, Iranians will wake up in the morning saying, are we better off? No, we are worse off. So protests hopefully will resume. That's my hope. Unless Americans are going to surrender more and more and more, which I doubt.
Like everything tonight, we're going to try to bring it back to the impact that something like this has on the Israeli elections. Previously, Netanyahu very much portrayed himself as being really close to President Trump, and we've already seen the Likud pull adverts of Bibi and Trump together. How do you think what's happened over the last week, the Vance thing, the deal, how do you think that will impact on Bibi's election chances come October?
So Netanyahu's claim to fame has always been his ability to deal, to be on a league of his own with in dealing with the U.S. His most glorious hour in electoral terms came after a public dispute, bitter dispute with President Obama in 2015. That's how he won at the election in a landslide. It's not the case for President Trump for two reasons. One, Netanyahu doesn't have an American opposition party to support his cause. There are more chances that the Democratic Party will invite Mujtaba Khamenei to give a speech in front of the Congress than Prime Minister Netanyahu these days. And the second is that, as you said, Netanyahu based his last 2 years on being able to talk to Trump. One, I don't think the love affair between Netanyahu and Trump is definitely going to be brought to an end. It's too early to say because we don't know. We don't know what comes next. And the second thing, according to polls in Israel last week, more people believe, especially among undecided swing voters, still believe Netanyahu's ability to deal with the Iranian question is higher than Bennett's and Eisenhower's, which means that it's still an advantage for Netanyahu. He can actually rewrap the diplomacy question from who can cooperate with Trump to who can manage this very complicated task. So to be honest, we don't really know yet.
So let's talk for a moment about the war with Iran.
Yes.
Was it a success from an Israeli perspective? Because we went into this expecting regime change. We went into this looking for the destruction of Iranian nuclear material, for limitations on Iranian ballistic missiles. And we've landed up with money flows, even if it's only 20 or $30 billion into Iran. How successful has this operation actually been for Israel?
Okay, so it's too early to say. There were two purposes, I think. One was, or two total victories. One is by taking the enriched uranium, having a press conference, Trump and Netanyahu, and in between 10 black barrels of what we call the dust, those 440 kilograms of enriched uranium. This is one option, which would prove that, one, the efforts, a generation effort that cost $30 billion was to no avail. It was futile from an Iranian perspective. And the second option, of course, is to topple the regime. Now, so far, we got none of those. That's why there is bitterness inside the Israeli society. And the vast majority believe that Iran won this round of war. While I don't think Iran won, I think the game is still very, very long. And it's longer than people expected when they sat in shelters, when they were sitting in shelters for 40 consecutive days.
But Bibi's always held himself out as the protector of Israel. And has that mantle been broken? Has that image been broken as he heads up into the election? Or do you think his supporters still believe that he is the best choice as a military diplomatic protector of the state of Israel?
To be honest, I don't really know. I think while we are, heading towards the election, we're still quite far from the election. We're 119 days, 119 from the election, which is more than the expectancy or the length of every election campaign in the last 20 years. So it's still very, very early. But I think that this very election specifically are not going to be decided by a brilliant AI TV ad or by a slogan or one alliance or the other. It's going to be decided in Tehran and in southern Lebanon. If the situation will be perceived by the Israeli public as it is perceived now, I think Netanyahu can actually wrap his belongings to save him work on October 21st. If, however, people will change their minds because it's going to be more peaceful, because there are going to be achievements, because Trump will rejoin forces with Israel, things might look quite differently. So this is way more, the military campaign is way more important than the electoral one.
So you mentioned Lebanon, which probably creates a good segue for us to travel up north, because you still have hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are not in their homes in the north. You're having soldiers injured and killed on a fairly regular basis in Lebanon. Israel's tried before to keep a military buffer zone within Lebanon, and that wasn't very successful. What do you think the strategy currently is for Lebanon over the next year or two?
Okay, there are only two ways to destroy Hezbollah once and for all. One is by making Iran to fall. If the Iran regime collapses, the current one, it necessarily means and immediately means the collapse of Hezbollah as well, because 90% of the funding and weapons that arrive or fall into Hezbollah hands comes from Tehran. The second option is just for Israel to take over in the entire state of Lebanon. This is, of course, something Israel is not going to do. It's not going to be accepted both domestically and internationally. And therefore, in the foreseen future, Israel will have to manage the situation. Now, I think Hezbollah has been devastatingly hit by Israel. I don't know if you are aware of the fact that 25% of the combatants of Hezbollah combatants or Hezbollah militants got killed by Israel, out of which 10%, 3,000 terrorists got killed in the last 3 months of fighting. Israel destroyed 10 out of 15,000 buildings in southern Lebanon that used as bunkers, warehouse, storage facilities, etc. And Israel found 2 monstrous arrays of tunnels under the hills of the Bufor and Ali Tahir. That's why Hezbollah is desperate for a ceasefire. And I think we can actually keep the deterrence. I don't trust, however, the government of Lebanon, because people say that when there is a will, there is a way. So they definitely have a will, but they're so weak. And the average soldier in the Lebanese army earns 10% of the average salary in Hezbollah, that it doesn't make any sense that the Lebanese government or army are going to actually tackle Hezbollah soon. So I think we should give our American friends some time, keep southern Lebanon in Israeli hands, and letting the deal to collapse in Iran and not in Lebanon, so Israel is not to be blamed for shaking the entire international stability.
You're talking about the collapse of the deal in Iran. What do you think will happen when that collapses? Clearly, Trump is not going to go back to war, certainly not before the November the 3rd elections in the United States. He doesn't want petrol or gas prices to go up. He doesn't want another conflict on the agenda. So what happens when that deal collapses?
When this deal collapses, to be honest, we don't know. I think the best scenario for Israel is to keep the situation in a no deal, no war situation. Because for Israel, every day that goes without the Iranian economy earning more money from oil, it actually helps to shake the very foundation of this fundamentalist regime. Thus, and time works on our side. I don't think going into a war without taking the enriched uranium is going to make a difference.
How do you think the residents in the north are going to vote differently maybe this time around, given what they've experienced, certainly since the 8th of October, 2023?
From the Israeli perspective?
Yeah. From Israeli voters living in the north.
Okay, so they went through a depressing, unprecedented situation in which they were evacuated. They had been evacuated from their homes for more than a year and for 14 months. And then they came back, and it was the closest it could reach. It was all but total victory. And then came this war. And it's more depressing because while they do not suffer the same amount of rockets and the same amount of sirens and the fear of invasion, because the enemy is very far away, and the villages, the Shiite villages that overlooked them are now in ruins and reduced to rubble, they still feel that their situation has deteriorated compared to 4 months ago, because they felt that they are going to have years and decades of peace, of quiet, and they got war in return. That's why they're depressed. And
How do you think that
justifiably so.
how do you think that affects the way they'll vote?
So the entire North is something like one seat out of 120. So it's not very significant in terms of vote, but their feeling resounds in the entire country. Everyone has cousins, family, friends, clients in the North. And since Israel is quite a small country, so the sound of a siren is resounding nationwide. That's why it can be very, very problematic for Netanyahu if the situation continues.
Has the MOU between the United States and Iran actually tried to handcuff Israel in what it can and can't do in Iran? America seems to have recognized the role for Iran within what's happened. It seems to have linked Hezbollah and Israel into some sort of deal without Israel's participation, and has even now was suggested that this deal has to be rubber stamped by the United Nations Security Council. And could that force into something that ties Israel's hands and its ability to continue its war against Hezbollah?
Okay, here are the two lessons from October 7th. Lesson number one that we all know is that we should not contain our enemies and let them rearm and get stronger on our borders. But the second lesson should be remembered as well. And it is that opportunities or dangers in the diplomatic arena can be more destructive than military ones. So Israel should be prepared not only to defend itself against its enemies, but to defend itself against its diplomatic enemies as well, which means that sometimes you have to be more flexible. That's why I think that the decision to hold fire in southern Lebanon, while it's hard to digest, I can understand it. I know it's a double-edged sword, because if soldiers are not allowed to shoot at threats or possible threats, so it means that the enemy can actually get stronger. But I think that Israel would only earn from giving Americans these 60 days, and this is going to help us in the long run in Lebanon as well.
You tweeted out a very interesting comment by Henry Kissinger in the week that maybe you can repeat for us, because I think it was maybe very telling.
I tweeted so much. What? Which of the 754?
Maybe I can read your tweet back to you. I think let me just get onto. It said, after Donald Trump declared the agreement finalized last night, I recall a line from Henry Kissinger. It may be dangerous to be America's enemies, but to be America's friend is fatal.
I see. Yes. Okay. Yes. It got some reactions. By the way, I met Henry Kissinger once. It was some 8-9 years ago in a hotel in Tel Aviv. He organized himself at the age of 95 a seminar, a 12-hour seminar about current Israeli affairs, and I was the last one. It was 10 p.m. and he said, "And now for the fun part of the evening, politics." So he knows something about the US and about Israel. He knew about it a lot, and yes, clever young man.
Yeah, when we meet, I'll tell you about my interactions with Kissinger as well.
Sure.
I mean, you spoke about 7th of October, and the part we haven't touched on is Gaza. And Netanyahu's response after Gaza and after the 7th of October, does he bear political responsibility for what happened on the 7th of October? And if he does, why was he not more forthright and saying, I am responsible, it was a mistake? What is within him that the Prime Minister failed to take that responsibility?
Moshe Dayan was very old and sick when he once met the then young and healthy Ariel Sharon. Dayan was at the how do you call it? At the end of his political career, and Sharon had just began it. So Sharon asked for one advice, and Dayan said, "Never apologize for anything." I think while Netanyahu was not present then at the Knesset restaurant, he fully adopted this advice. It's not a coincidence that in Hebrew you do not have a word for accountability. I suspect that the founding fathers of modern Hebrew didn't bother to order to invite a word because they said, no one's gonna use it. No one's gonna use it anyway in Jerusalem. It's not a surprise for me. I don't think it would change a lot, politically speaking. And Netanyahu's idea, I guess, was that he can actually put the responsibility on the shoulders of the military apparatus and his opponents, etc. And he partially succeeded in this. Partially, not fully, of course.
So let's talk about Gaza. Is Gaza the forgotten war? What actually is happening there?
I think that what happens in Gaza is as close as possible to total victory. Why? Because Gaza is no longer a threat until further notice, is no longer a threat. The Hamas does not exist anymore as a military threat. It was reduced back to a guerrilla organization. Israel controls 60 to 70% of the Gaza Strip, thus enveloping Hamas. The main tragedy that led to October 7th was the smuggles from the Egyptian border or from the sea or from the air. Now Israel actually blocks Gaza, thus preventing Hamas to rearm. More than this, every single hostage is back home in Israel, which was the #1 ingredient in shredding the Israeli society to pieces in the 2 years prior to the signing the agreement. So Hamas no longer has the weapons that it used to hold, both refugees, rockets, and thousands of terrorists. However, so what I'm trying to say is that if I'm assured that this situation is going to keep on forever, I'm against another military operation there. I'm worried about a situation in which in 2 years from now, either President Trump gets tired from it, thus demanding Israel to withdraw, or the next more hostile president demands Israel to withdraw from the occupied Palestinian territory, quote unquote. And that's why I guess we are going to need to act. I still do not think it's going to happen before the election.
Just people may wondering why we rushing through so fast this tour of the Middle East and everything that's happening. And the reason is because we only have 10 minutes left with Amit, because he has to go and do the news at 8 p.m. Israel time, which is 7 p.m. South Africa time. So we only have 10 minutes left. And that's why we're rushing so fast around the region. If you're watching us on YouTube tonight, please click the like and subscribe button. That just helps us communicate with you better. So that's the one favor that we actually ask of you this evening. Second is, Amit, you can put in again your newsletter for people to subscribe to your newsletter, please. I think a lot of people will be interested in your opinions, as we are this evening, but it would be great if every day they could keep up and keep track of you through your newsletter as well. So sure. I want to talk about some of the opportunities that may have arisen recently. And during the last period with the war with Iran, the cooperation between people like the United Arab Emirates and Israel seems to have increased greatly. What do you see as the opportunities that Israel actually has, positive opportunities that now exist? And how do you view Israel's standing in the world?
Israel's standing in the world is quite complicated, to say the least, because there is what we call Israel fatigue. You wake up in the morning in Cape Town or in New York City or in Ronkonkoma or no matter where, And you keep hearing about a small country in the Middle East, and you hear that Israel attacked in Gaza, /Syria, /Lebanon, /Iran, Yemen, Doha. And while we know, I hope we know that it was justified, and Israel, it was a result of unprovoked attacks against Israel, it's quite hard to explain to foreigners that it's not Israel which is the violent one. Add to this the good old anti-Semitism and political considerations and Qatari money, big money. It's the biggest spender on earth, and you'll get the outcome that it's, as a doctor, I would say a missile a day keeps the support away. So we should actually focus on try and bring more peaceful, I mean, a decade of peaceful times in Israel. I hope it's going to dramatically improve Israel's situation.
Do you see any hope for a Saudi-Israel deal in the near future?
I think there is a problem because while Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship, it has constituency nonetheless. And the Muslim constituency detests Israel. And that's why it's hard for them to actually sign the deal. And as we all saw during the war, Saudi Arabia is not the bravest nation on earth, to say the least. They're not going to qualify for the World Cup of bravery. And and that's why I'm quite pessimistic about it. But I know that Trump is invested in actually broadening the framework of the Abraham Accords, thus including Saudi Arabia in it. So I'm still up in the air in this.
I think you neatly ducked Israel's standing in the world generally at the moment. But one of the things that has severely impacted on it is the inclusion of extreme right-wingers in Netanyahu's government, Ben Gvir, Smotrich. How do you see things playing out with the two of them in the run-up to the elections?
I would say that they're very different from one another. Smotrich is an ideologist. You might support or detest his position, his opinions, but he promotes the policy. Ben Gvir is a populist right-winger. He's interested more in TikToks, in my opinion. I'm not a member of his fan club, to be honest. And I would put it this way. I keep hearing from even very hawkish pro-Israel communities abroad that Ben Gvir is one bridge too far. I do hope, without any connection to Ben Gvir, that the next government of Israel will be a unity one. I think Israel desperately needs it, and I think the world needs it in order to be the next PR agency. This would be the PR advice I would give to Israel. Have a unity government, put Ben Gvir in the opposition, and try to recover in the opinion market worldwide.
So you mentioned opinions. Talk to us about the latest opinion polls. What is it looking like, and how is the country dividing according to the polls, with 119 days to go?
So according to most of the polls, at least in the mainstream media, Netanyahu is going to suffer one of his worst defeats in 20 years. However, it still doesn't mean in the Israeli system that his rivals can actually form a coalition, because as long as they say they're not going to join forces with the Arab parties or with the ultra-Orthodox or with Netanyahu himself, they're short of an outright majority, somewhere between 2 to 6 seats short. In a Knesset of 120 Knesset members is quite significant. When you bear in mind that usually Netanyahu scores a bit higher in the results than in the polls, and that there might be another center-right new party that is going to not join his opposition, I think it's too early to write Netanyahu's obituaries, but no doubt his situation is very problematic. Proof evidence number one, or Exhibit A is the fact that Netanyahu tries to actually postpone the election as much as he can. Had he been convinced in the polls, the more favorable polls in the right-winning television channels, he would have called up early election way before.
So let us presume that everyone watching us is betting on Polymarket and they want the best advice that anyone can give them. Talk to us about who you think the next Prime Minister of Israel will be. Will it be Eisenkot? How has he risen so dramatically? How has Gantz collapsed so dramatically? What's happening with Bennett? Run us through a few of the scenarios and where do you think we'll land up? You know, I keep on saying on our channel, only fools and prophets predict the future, and none of us are prophets.
Exactly. I would say, I would say that the next prime minister is going to be either Netanyahu, Eisenkot, or Lieberman. Netanyahu, if he sticks to his political base and getting more than 55 seats, thus preventing the other side from having an outright majority. Eisenkot, if the scenario goes the other way around, or if he breaks his own election pledges and join forces with the ultra-Orthodox or the Arabs. And Lieberman, if he bribes his way or blackmails his way all the way to the prime minister's office, exactly the same way Bennett did in 2021, saying, okay, I know I got only 6-7% of the popular vote, but if you want to form a coalition, it means that I'm the kingmaker, and as a kingmaker, I would like to be the king myself, at least part of the time. That's my guess, my assessment.
So come nail your colors to the mast. Come October, presumably it's going to take a month or two to actually get a coalition together. Who's your bet on for the next prime minister?
I would say a rotation government of Netanyahu and Eisenkot.
Give us, many of us in the diaspora know that Eisenkot's paid a very heavy personal price in the run-up to these elections and over the last few years. Give us your perspective on Eisenkot.
Eisenkot, 34 years ago to the day, Yitzhak Rabin defeated Yitzhak Shamir and became Israel's prime minister. And the strategy hasn't changed since then. If you want to get elected from the center left, you have to be a former IDF chief of staff. You have to have a cohesive story. You have to exploit the disillusionment of right-wing voters and to make them think that you are not as leftist as your predecessors in the leadership of the center left. So far, Eisenkot has walked in Rabin's footsteps, but it's way too early to say. He's a former IDF chief of staff. His parents made Aliyah from Morocco. He's a grieving father, of course. He grew up in Eilat. So it's very, very hard to negatively attack him. But it's really it's like forever. 4 months in Israel is like forever.
Amit Segal, thank you so much for joining us this evening. The last word of the evening is going to be to David Cohen. We know you have to go. Tell us the news at 8
Thank
p.m.
you so much.
Give us what the headline is going to be.
The headline?
Yes.
If I tell you, I have to kill you. No, I'm kidding. Something domestic about politics. No, not really interesting. Within the Democrat Party. Not something interesting.
I'm going to ask everyone who's watching us this evening on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube, to please leave a message for you, and we'll make sure that we mail the messages all through to you this evening. Thank you so much for giving up your time. And the final word of the evening goes to David Cohen.
Yeah, thank you again. Thanks, Amit. I know you had to run. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on what we hope, again, is a series of webinars on current events and the election. Thanks so much, Howard, for moderating this really amazing hour, as well as all of our partners from the Zionist Federation Cape Council, the National Federation, the KwaZulu-Natal Cape Council, and, of course, the Jewish Report. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And we'll see you again. Please subscribe to Amit's newsletter. It's been amazing, and everyone will get something out of it. Thanks, everybody.
So, Dave, before we say goodbye to everyone, I don't know if you know, but we're actually co-hosting an event together in July, and Mark Regev will
Yes.
be joining us, and we'll be doing both a live event with Mark Regev as well as an online event with Mark Regev in July. And it's just such a pleasure to be able to co-host together with the South African Zionist Federation, and more importantly, to provide access to some of the greatest thinkers in the world on platforms such as this. So I want to thank the Zionist Federation, particularly the Cape Council of the Zionist Federation, for your foresight and for your enthusiasm to make sure that we are fully informed, fully educated, and we have access to such amazing, amazing people. So Dave, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you again. I'll leave the chat open for the next 5 or 10 minutes so you can leave a message. But please thank Amit for his participation this evening. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Have a good dinner if you haven't had yet. Cheers.